Hello and welcome. In this group of videos, in this cluster, we're going to be looking at the lines from about line 60 through about line 200. We're going to be dealing with the question of communication and its difficulty. We're also going to be looking at issues of obscurity, some issues of obscurity that happen willfully because of the choices made by the characters in the poem, and some which are forced upon the characters. We're also going to be examining the political context and the political choices that create that obscurity, and examining what Shelley hoped to gain from creating this difficulty. After all, we say, well, why would we want to write a poetry that was so difficult to understand, that actually thematizes the problems of communication? Well, I think we're going to be able to give you some pretty good answers to it, because although we're dealing with obscurity, we're going to deal with it in a way that I believe will clarify and illuminate. Enjoy the video. Ye mountains whose many-voiced echoes through the mist of cataracts flung the thunder of that spell. Ye icy springs, stagnant with wrinkling frost, which vibrated to hear me and then crept shuddering through India. Thou serenest air, through which the sun walks burning without beams. Now, I just want to mention that here, each of these is about to be personified. We're going to get these voices, and one is going to be like the voice of the mountains, the voice of the icy springs, the voice of the air. And ye swift whirlwinds, who on poised wings hung mute and moved o'er yon hushed abyss, as thunder louder than your own made rock the orbed world. If then my words had power, though I am changed, so that all evil wish is dead within, although no memory be of what is hate, let them not lose it now. What was that curse? Sorry for ham acting, but what was that curse? For ye all heard me speak. So here's this person who's almost defined by this act of cursing, and yet he can't remember what it is. So just one thing that it makes me think about is we all ask ourselves, how can it be that a person as evil as Stalin or Hitler does not go to hell? But then the next question would be, I think, one of the next questions would be, so let's say you went to hell. I mean, what Prometheus suffers is pretty close to hell. What happens 3,000 years later? What happens 300,000 years later? Your life is 70, 80 years. What would you be after 3,000? What would remain of such a place? So there's some kind of implicit critique, I think, of the idea of permanently being anything. Permanently being in heaven, permanently being in hell.
Thrice 300,000 years, o'er the earthquake's couch we stood. Oft as men convulsed with fears, we trembled in our multitude.
Thunderbolts had parched our water, we had been stained with bitter blood, and had run mute mid shrieks of slaughter through a city and a solitude.
I had clothed since earth uprose its wastes in colours not their own, and oft had my serene repose been cloven by many a rending groan.
We had soared beneath these mountains on resting ages, nor had thunder, nor yon volcanoes' flaming fountains, nor any power above or under ever made us mute with wonder.
But never bowed our snowy crest as at the voice of thine unrest.
Never such a sound before to the Indian waves we bore. A pilot asleep on the howling sea leaped up from the deck in agony, and heard and cried, "Ah, woe is me," and died as mad as the wild waves beat.
By such dread words from earth to heaven, my still realm was never riven. When its wound was closed, there stood darkness o'er the day like blood.
And we shrank back, For dreams of ruin to frozen caves, our flight pursuing made us keep silence. Thus and thus, the silence is as hell to us.
Yeah, it's interesting that he really puts in those breaks
Yeah.
to give us the moments of silence. The blank verse at the beginning of the poem. And what is he doing with the verse in these few lines?
So I do hear a lot of regular rhyme, but I'm also hearing some slant rhyme,
Mhm.
some Dickinsonian I rhyme, the EYE rhyme, especially when Orchid Red was stood in blood. They look like they rhyme visually, but they don't. So I mean, it seems like he's pushing the form, pushing what we expect from the rhyme or the meter. Again, it's difficult for me to, sometimes with meter, but he's also using these M dashes and some punctuation that pushes against, I think, regular meter.
So I think you've really hit on something that occurred to me, because when I first read this, I just thought, okay, he's broken into some kind of very regular meter here. And then I thought, wait a second, no, it's not quite that, is it? It's much more regular than what we had been used to. He's experimenting with form and bringing us to a new place, but you need to be a little subtle here and look for exactly what's going on. Okay, why do you think Shelley might have chosen forms like this at this point in the poem, coming out of the blank verse?
It's a really good question. I don't have an immediate answer. Can you just give me a minute just to...
Sure.
And perhaps if other people have something to...
Absolutely. Anybody else think about why?
I mean, are these old primitive voices that only know how to speak this way? And so this is a contrast to the Prometheus voice, which is rebelling and pushing against maybe. It's just one. But you know that these voices have they heard Prometheus, or is he just hearing them?
So that's a good question. I think he does, that there is going to be an issue about understanding each other, which we're going to come to with the earth. There is difficulty in understanding the tongues of the dead, and this is something that Yohi had discussed. The challenge is, how can we understand each other if we are speaking fundamentally different languages, and yet there is some kind of sympathetic correspondence.
Interesting that you thought of, because there's the line from the earth, they dare not, and then Prometheus says, who dares? And then the next earth talking says, how canst thou hear who knowest not the language of the dead? So to me it seems like the earth is not expecting Prometheus to understand, and then the fact that the word dare is repeated is a moment where the earth suddenly thinks, wait a minute, maybe something did get through. And then at first, Prometheus says, I only know that thou art moving near in love. And then the earth tries to talk to Prometheus explicitly. And then the shadow part happens, and then the earth says, reluctantly, no, thou canst not hear. Like, the earth tried, thought there was an opening, was disappointed, but then, and what art thou, O melancholy voice? And that's interesting to me, because at first it was, I only know that you're moving near in love. And so suddenly after the disappointment, it becomes a melancholy voice. So it seems like there's some kind of transference, even if the actual language isn't getting through in a linear way.
Sorry, and then what does that transform into?
Into the melancholy voice. And it happens at the exact moment where the earth is disappointed. That what the earth thought was a communication, the earth tries to communicate, is disappointed, and then right after that moment of disappointment is when it transfers into a melancholy voice. So it's like the affect gets through, even if the meaning doesn't on a literal level.
I'm going to throw out a suggestion here. I think when Shelley is personifying natural elements, he's very much aware of the trying to create an aesthetic mirror for the forms in nature, which have correspondences and resonances. He's personifying mountains, he's personifying springs, and they have formal qualities that we know
have a certain degree of regularity and a certain degree of change, because not all rivers are exactly the same as a river, not all mountains exactly the same as a mountain, and yet it's not the voice of an individual, a titan, a person, a rebellious soul. It's not quite a thinking, free individual striving towards liberation. These are the forms personified. And so he's playing with aesthetic possibilities and drawing forms to them. Now I'm going to try to do something with you guys that's a little bit complicated. I'm going to assume that it will be hard to hear all four of you reading together as the earth. But remembering that Prometheus is struggling to hear the sounds of the earth, I think we'll experience in a visceral way the difficulty of making sense if we have the earth speak together. So I'm going to ask all four of you to try to read these lines around line 104 or so. And I'll read Prometheus.
From that.
Yeah. 1, on 3, ready? 1, 2, 3.
The tongueless caverns of the craggy hills cried misery. Then the hollow heaven replied, misery. And the ocean's fertile waves, climbing the land, howled to the lashing winds, and the pale nations heard it, misery.
I hear a sound of voices, not the voice which I gave forth. Mother, thy sons and thou scorn him, without whose all-enduring will, beneath the fierce omnipotence of Jove, both they and thou have vanished, like thine mist unrolled on the morning wind. Know ye not me, the Titan, he who made his agony the barrier to your else all-conquering foe? So we know in a certain sense he didn't know himself, and so he's gone outside of himself to find something, someone who knows him. But what's coming back at him is this confusing jumble of not quite recognizable sounds. O rock embosomed lawns and snow-fed streams, now seeth aught pearl vapors deep below, through whose all-shadowing woods I wandered once with Asia, drinking life from her loved eyes. Why scorn the spirit which informs ye now to commune with me? Me alone, who checked, as one who checks a fiend-drawn charioteer, the falsehood and the force of him who reigns supreme, and with the groans of pinioned slaves fills your dim glens and liquid wildernesses. Why answer ye not still, brethren? And then the earth says, they dare not. Who dares? For I would hear that curse again. What an awful whisper rises up. 'Tis scarce like a sound. It tingles through the frame as lightning tingles, hovering here its strike. Here I think we remember Shelley's deep and passionate interest in the connection between lightning, electricity, and the force of life, the communication and the vivification that comes through the body's meeting with the electric. Speak, Spirit, from thine inorganic voice. I only know that thou art moving near, and love. How curse I him? He just wants to know. And the earth says, 1, 2, 3.
How canst thou hear, who knowest not the language of the dead?
Thou art a living spirit, speak as they. So Prometheus here is telling us that he understands the language of the living. But the earth has a reason for not speaking that language, which she now explains. And I'm asking you for to do this for me one more time.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
I dare not speak like life, lest heaven's fellow king should hear, and link me to some wheel of pain, more torturing than the one whereon I roll. Subtle thou art and good, and though the gods hear not this voice, yet thou art more than God, being wise and kind, earnestly hearken now.
How come when they speak together, I mean, just thinking of that one director's, like when they speak together, it doesn't rhyme. And so it's like the combination of
Right.
that form.
Exactly.
Are they speaking more like Prometheus here?
Yes, exactly.
So is that just what he's hearing?
There is something about the entirety of the earth that he envisions Gaia-like as an organism with its own thought process. So, whereas aspects or elements of the earth are personified by their nature and fall within certain boundaries, and they can be seen as limited. When you put them all together, they become as unlimited as Prometheus. Why is the earth afraid? What do you think, John?
He's bound to this turning wheel.
So we have this idea, it's because Shelley has now revealed the earth somehow as a conscious being, that we can imagine the earth suffering. And we see that the earth is forced into this revolving, endless motion which it cannot get off of. More torturing than the wheel of pain on which I roll. So we see now there's a kind of balance between the Prometheus figure who is suffering and the earth who's racked onto a wheel of pain. And the earth is a feminine, actually, represented as the mother figure. And we know that Shelley is someone who's very aware of the political limitations of women and disgusted by them. In fact, perhaps his only hero as great as, I think Mary Wollstonecraft, perhaps even more than her husband, although they were both such great heroes to him. The place of women in society that Shelley objects to. Just listen to this. Lest heaven's fell king should hear and link me to some wheel of pain more torturing than the one on which I roll. How many women could have spoken about their life in private to each other as being on a wheel of pain more torturing than the one on which I roll? But there's one other kind of prison house law of limitation that Shelley is struggling with as much as Prometheus, and that's language. Because understanding each other is clearly a difficult act. And we've talked about how Shelley sometimes uses obscurity or difficulty to try to help his readers think past the limitations of the society in which they live. So here's Prometheus in the act of trying to understand language, trying to connect with the female mother, which gave him life and supports all life. How can I understand you? Perhaps, like all men, had to reach past the limitations of a language which was embedded in patriarchy, embedded in power, in order to understand the women in their lives. Obscurely through my brain, like shadows dim, sweep awful thoughts, rapid and thick. I feel faint, like one mingled in entwining love, yet 'tis not pleasure.
Sounds like female hysteria. Like it almost sounds like he's ventriloquizing what she cannot or knows not to say. like right there. Like that's, I don't know.
Shelley definitely wanted not to give that to the earth.
He said it instead.
Right, he said it
Earth,
instead.
right?
I think so. I think he may have, I wonder if he thought about that and said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give the earth something else, which is telling him, no, thou canst not hear. Thou art immortal, and this tongue is known only to those who die. So to answer that question, the earth knows she could speak in a way that Prometheus would understand, but she chooses not to. And she does that to protect her very, very limited security. She's in such a vulnerable state already, tied to this rack by Jove, that she is desperately afraid of more punishment if she goes out to help the rebellion. And how many women must have thought, I want to change this world. I want to go out with the men and strike. I want to go out and do this differently. But if I do that, the people around me are going to condemn me because socially this is not allowed in the world that I live in.